Gideon stepped closer so she was forced to look up into his face. He did not look like his usually amused and distracted self. He said, "If I wanted to return to my abode, I would have said as much." Hara raised an eyebrow, curious by this change in him. "Just be happy you are getting a free ride. It is the least I can do after you used your winnings to buy the ship." He growled, and it was so much like an animal growl that it made her eyes widen in shock. But she wasn't about to be intimidated. "I am heading for the capital of the empire, and you said you would tag along." "Well, mate, you are going to tag along until we get there, and then we can go our separate ways." His gold eyes sparked and he turned away. "We will see." She didn't think she had won this argument, but at least it was over for the moment. Alice coughed from the doorway and asked, "Should I come back later?" Hara shook her head and motioned for the girl to approach. "I need to teach you how to do a few things so you can help me on the bridge." Gideon is all but useless. He snorted to show he had heard but wasn't going to be insulted. He wouldn't be that easy to be rid of. Hara brought Alice over to the map and said, "This is where we are now. This is where we are heading. Guess the plot we might take." The girl studied the map for a moment and it told Hara the girl was conscientious. Eventually, she traced a finger over the map. She said, "You'd want to avoid the mountains." Hara smiled, pleased with her comment. "Yes. We have a certain amount of lift, but we are buoyant static at the moment, and even with compensators we wouldn't be able to cross those peaks." Alice's finger stopped on a town and she asked, "Will we stop along the way?" Hara shifted a piece of sheer paper over the map to show their planned route. They would go through the town the girl had pointed out and said, "By law, we have to. These towns are called border towns. We need to stop there to get our papers signed. Hopefully, we can also pick up a cargo as money is in short supply." Alice said absently as she continued to study the map. "I like numbers." Hara laughed. "Then you will get on with Gideon." Alice looked up with some confusion, but Hara didn't clarify. Maybe if Hara could guide the dragon's attention to someone else who was better suited to him, he would forget about her. Men had been like that before. Hopefully the dragon was as equally fickle. The border town had mine balloons floating off to either side of the town, forcing airships to funnel through the town. Hara watched the men on towers with flags motioning for her to take up a position in a queue of airships. The town would be their last stop before they entered the empire. It would be a good place to pick up supplies and maybe cargo. It would be best to find work so she wouldn't have to rely on Gideon and his gambling skills. Alice asked, "Will it be safe?" Hara glanced over her shoulder at the girl and thought about her question seriously. Border towns like this usually held a unique kind of riffraff. Hara pulled a knife from her boot and passed it to the girl. "The first thing you should always do is run. But if that isn't an option, use the knife. Now you should be all right." Alice eyed the knife for a moment before she took it and tucked it into her own boot beneath her skirts. Hara would have to get the girl some clothes, which would work better on the ship than bulky skirts. She planned to take the first shift on the airship and install some things she made in the last week of travel. Hopefully, with her improvements, they could actually fight back if they were ever attacked. She couldn't completely automate the guns, but she had rerouted them and made it so she could shoot all the guns from the bridge. With Alice on the bridge as well, they might even have a slim chance the next time they were attacked by pirates. Hara glanced over at Gideon. He had sulked the last week and it annoyed her. Couldn't he argue with her like a normal person? When they docked and the others left, Gideon remained. He came to stand by her and said, "I'm not going to go. You will have to get used to that." She hauled out the equipment she intended to install and asked, "And why is that?" Gideon looked thoughtful. He didn't answer her. Instead he asked, "What do you know about dragons and their collections?" Her Opa had spoken about dragons, but she had never been very interested in finding anything out about them. She had always thought they were man-eating monsters, so what was the point of finding out more of them? Hara glanced at him and shrugged. Nothing really. You guys are obsessed with your collections, is all I know. He cocked up an eyebrow which went up into his long fringe. She really wanted to give him a haircut. His half-cocked smile went with the eyebrow annoyed her as he said, "It is more than that. We gain our status from what we have collected. The more we can look after, the more status we have. The more unique our collection is differentiates our status at the higher levels rank." Hara frowned at him for a moment and he continued. If you have an extensive collection, you would have a rank like in an army unit of colonel. To be considered a general, you would have to have something unique in your collection. She asked, suspicious of his motives or the validity of his words. And you think women should be in your collection? He frowned until there was a wrinkle on his nose. We look after those in our collection. I know people think it is slavery, but it is more like servitude. Hara snorted and went back to her work. She said snidely. Like servitude is better than slavery. Gideon frowned and then clicked his fingers as he figured something out and said, not your slavery or servitude, Hara, but rather ours. I mean dragons. Once you are in a collection, you are served by the dragon. We choose carefully who is worthy to be in our collection as it might mean our lives. She turned and blinked at him in astonishment. After a long moment, she asked, your servitude? So you don't want me to belong to you? Gideon looked confused before he said, yes, I do, but not as a slave. Hara frowned and he explained, waving his hands around to add to his words. Like with your Opa. You went to him to get the ship fixed as you knew he would do it without question. You belong to him so he serves you. Hara had never been accused of being a dimwit, so she finally understood what he tried to explain. Oh, bugger, you want to be family. Gideon grinned, happy he had finally convinced her, and said, exactly, but dragons, we are hatched and none of our females or males have attachments to their young. We do not have families in the same way humans do. We collect family though, and I want to be in your family. Hara stopped and leant on the wrench she was using. She studied the dragon for a long while. There was a flaw in his logic. He might choose his family, but she couldn't. Eventually she said, I have my own family and they would be your family as well. Gideon nodded. I'm aware of this. Your Opa is worthy. If only her Opa were the only family she had left. But you haven't met my father. Gideon frowned. If you are his child, then he should be worthy. He really needed to study humans more. She snorted and went back to work. She said as she put in the console to fire the weapons from. I won't be in your collection, Gideon, until you have met my father. There was a long silence from the dragon and she looked to see what he was doing. Gideon thought and eventually said, I have seen this tradition amongst humans. I agree to this stipulation. She wasn't about to ask what he meant by that and went back to work. Maybe if he thought she was willing to join his collection, he would leave her alone to work peacefully for a short time. Besides, she really didn't think he would find her father worthy.